read Bill 60? If everybody has a copy, maybe you can just say, see the front page.
Bill 60, see the front page. Bill 60 authorizes the refinancing of bonds to the tune of $30 million, and it also contains a borrowing of $3.5 million.
That's a very good synopsis. Mr. Hartzell, it's yours.
President McLean, members of council, thank you very much for us meeting here tonight on what is a very important issue dealing with the refinancing of a significant amount of existing debt in the city, along with a short-term loan that we had factored into the 2018 budget that we are now ready to present this evening. I'm going to give a very brief presentation, or just a summary of what this is all about, which I think you will all seen in the email that I would have sent to you this afternoon. And then I will turn it over to Tom Beckett from NW Financial and to David Payne from PNC, who is our lead underwriter on this, to go through the details of what is in the package that you have in front of you, that the folder with the PowerPoint, and the PowerPoint is now up on the screen so that anybody who wants to see it up there can look at it from that perspective. There are 3 or 4 major things that are going to come out of this refinancing, one of which is obviously we are taking the 2004 pension obligation bonds, the 2009 general obligation bonds, and the 2006 bank loan that the city has, and we are refinancing them in a way that is going to keep constant both the amortization schedules and the expected debt service that we have had anticipated on paying off of those loans going out in varying amounts to 2024, 2031, and 2034. What we have projected as debt service will not change in that regard. We will be able, as a result of the refinancing, to take in $1 million in immediate cash that will go into the cash reserve of the general fund, effective once the bond issue is completed and made public. And that will be a very helpful thing, no doubt, in improving our available cash balance to start 2019. We also have a $3.5 million short-term loan. The details of the items that are part of this were included in both the equipment fund for the most part and in the capital projects fund within the budget. Basically everything from 12 police cruisers to IT improvements to the necessary funds for the street improvement program for the year are included as part of that, and I did send that attachment to you earlier today along in the email so you can see in some detail what all of those projects are, but they were already included in the 2018 budget, and this is the financing mechanism that we had planned on in advance to make those a reality. And we're also, with respect to the 2006 loan, there is a separate law bill that is running alongside of this to make sure that the law with respect to the 2006 loan comports with what we are proposing to do in terms of the bond issue. And we'll get into that detail in just a little bit. At this point, I will talk to Mr. Beckett, start off with the presentation, and then Mr. Payne shortly thereafter, and we'll take it from there.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you, Brad. As part of our regular process in whenever we start a new engagement with a municipality, we take a pretty deep and thorough dive into your outstanding debt, and we look at that with an eye to see whether or not the market whether or not interest rates have come down, or whether or not there are any risks inherent in that debt that you might want to take off the table. We've done that since you hired us back in June, and the result of that is this financing tonight that we're proposing. We're going to go over the project description. We're going to go over a lot of detailed numbers. We are trying to do this at a fairly high level, but we do have all the backup here, so please feel free to ask any of the financing team here any of your questions. The first section, project description. This bond issue, as Brent already said, will not extend any debt past its current maturity. So we're not stretching anything out, we're not kicking any cans down the road here. We were funding only in the event that we get economic savings. In other words, like refunding your house mortgage, rates are lower. We can do that. The other piece that Brent mentioned is the 2006 variable loan, which we're recommending that you refinance to minimize interest rate risk. We're funding roughly $3.5 million of capital projects that are already in the city's budget. It makes sense if you're doing a larger borrowing to include a smaller borrowing because you save on upfront costs and issuance costs. As we said before, are going to eliminate the city's exposure to rising interest rates that it has currently on the 2006 CEDA loan. And I think the last bullet point I'd leave you with here is that this is really normal and prudent management of your balance sheet and your debt obligations. Do this every day. Dave Payne and I and Mr. Twaddell do this for a living, and we have clients that regularly look at this and take advantage of savings and take advantage of opportunities to reduce variable rate risk with fixed rate bonds. So the what we call the new money piece of this project, which is about $3.5 million, is going to fund $1.9 million of capital equipment, $600,000 of capital construction costs for road projects, and it's going to pay $1 million in reimbursement to the Commonwealth for the city's share of state road construction costs. These, as we said before, are already in the budget. We're just taking an opportunity to bundle this in with a larger financing. I think, go to the next slide. The second part of this is there's an outstanding general obligation note series of 2009. It's outstanding in the amount of $2.5 million. Next, click that. Pension obligation bonds are outstanding in the amount of $12.2 million. Those are funded. And then the last piece is a refunding, but it really is reacquiring land that you've leased to the CEDA back in 2006. That loan was initially a fixed rate loan, but it's been a variable rate loan since 2015. Section 2, go through this. This is the sizing. As you can see, across from left to right, each column represents each of the projects we just described. The first one is the 2006 refunding. We'll borrow about $7.8 million for that. The taxable pension obligation bonds, we'll borrow about 13.5. And again, these are estimates based on current market conditions. The tax exempt refunding of the 2009 is small, it's about $2.5 million. And then that $3.5 million new money borrowing is the last piece. It adds up to just over $27 million. Next one here. This chart shows the bonds and their maturities that we were funding. You can see the 2006 note matures in 2031, the 2009 note matures in 2024, and the 2004 pension obligation bond matures in 2034. Those are the existing rates and maturity dates. You can see they're high rates of 4.13 and 5.25 for the 09s and the 04s. We're not, as you can see in a bit, the savings from these things. The first piece is a net dissavings or a loss of $709 or $709,000. The taxable pension obligation bonds, the savings are $1 million. The general obligation bonds refunding for 2009 is about $72,000 savings. Next series, as you can see, this is the new debt. We're not extending beyond the original maturities of anything. We are adding in about $1.2 million of debt service from 2020 through 2022 for the new money. And we are fixing in that first column the variable rate debt in the 2006 bonds at about $775,000 a year through its existing maturity. Go on to the next one. Let's go back for a moment, and if you could roll back to page next one prior to that. There we go. Y'all asked me why I would come up here and recommend that you consider refunding debt that's going to show a cash flow loss of $709,000. Why would I do that? The answer to that is that that number is an artifact of where rates are today. That is assuming that between now and 2031, if you didn't refund the 2006 ACEDA loan, that it would always be at 2.5%. Its rate changes every single month. And it has gone from 0.5% to 2.5% in under a year. It's expected to go higher. Mr. Payne will go through PNC's interest rate outlook in a little bit. The maximum rate on those outstanding debts is 9.5. That would be very, very expensive for the city to pay 9.5. So what we're doing is we are fixing the rate on that at about 4%. It is higher than you're paying now, but again, that 2.5% is variable and it's headed on up. We ran some numbers in terms of sensitivity. If the rates were to hit 4%, that's basically your break-even rate. If short-term rates were 4% from now until the 2031 maturity, you would basically break even. The refunding would have made sense, you break even. To the extent that it's higher than that, if rates were to go to that maximum rate and stay there through the maturity of that debt, you would have cost yourself about $3.4 million extra in interest costs. So that $700,000 negative number there is basically an insurance policy against the potential for a $3.5 million hit if rates were to go up. That's about, that's the way I typically tend to look at this when you're taking risk off the table, is you're mitigating rate risk.
Would that be at the 9% that you said it would go to?
Yes, it's 9.45 is the maximum rate on that loan.
So,
Go ahead.
so the bottom line is the savings will be what, 438,000?
Yes, if you added,
When you add the negative, I mean, the loss versus the I guess the gains from refinancing some of the others, we would get 438,000
not,
or not?
let me give you what you get. All right, so because those latter two numbers, the million 076, if rates stay the same between now and the time we sell these bonds in a month or so, you'll get $1 million that we can put in your cash balance. That's real cash.
So that would be, in essence, to the $30 million we buy, I mean, refunding.
Yes, it's
Financing, I should say.
it's refinancing. The refinancing is allowing you to take $1 million out at the same payment on that.
Okay, but that $1 million, how much would it cost us to do the refinance? How much are we paying out to, all the people that we gotta pay to get this refinance?
Oh, you mean the issuance costs?
Yes.
Yeah, if you back up to page 5. Back, keep going.
I'm assuming is that included, is the cost?
All the costs
included?
are included in this. Yep, right there.
So the $1 million that you're saying that we would be gaining is actually,
It's actual cash.
It's actual cash.
Yes, with no change to our debt service going forward.
On that piece.
I had a nice conversation with Brent today about it, so I didn't ask him that question.
She said you would, thank you.
There's also about, in the smaller refunding, the ones, the 2009 refunding, there's about $70,000 of cash flow savings that come in 2018, 2008. So that's not on the table, but that's reduced debt service you'd see on relative to the 2009 debt. The loss number is really an artifact of my analysis. It says if rates were to stay at the low rates they are today, and you fix the rate at 4, which is what we're looking at fixing it at, what would be the difference in cash flow? That's it. That's a mathematical number. I don't know where rates are going to be. I'm not going to project. I'm not really even allowed to. But But what I can show you is that that's a pretty, I can't say worst case because rates could go lower, but that's a reasonable case to look at.
So this would be just one bond for all these bonds combined, right?
There would be, really, we're gonna have two series, one bond issue, two series of bonds. So we're gonna have a taxable series and a tax exempt series.
Okay.
But it would be one transaction. And you asked the question before, the cost of issuance are up there, which include the underwriter's compensation, which is $139,000 on a $27 million bond issue, or about $5, 0.5% of the amount borrowed. And then in the cost of issuance are lawyers' fees, the paying agent fees, the rating agent fees, some of my fee. And the biggest number in there is we put bond insurance, which will save you money or won't. If it doesn't save you money, we won't use it, and that number will come down.
And then on that last line that you see, that $1,062,000, that is the actual cash that is going to be forthcoming. That's not part of the cost, that's the actual cash that we would be having coming to the city at the end of this year once the bond issue is completed.
And whenever we show you these savings numbers, we're really obliged to show you these numbers net of cost.
So the total expense would be $423,000.
The total issuance cost, absolutely.
Okay. What if you use the rounding?
The rounding comes back to you. We have to issue in $5,000 increments. So if we don't have a purpose that rounds up to 5,000, we put in what's called rounding. And essentially that will if it's not used in paying for miscellaneous costs, it goes into your first debt service payment. We put it in the debt service payment, it pays the first interest payment.
Thank you.
Didn't want to interrupt, but go ahead.
No,
Go ahead, no, continue.
So
Okay.
I'll leave it up to Dave Payne, who's going to go over. This is important because it gets to the question of, would anybody expect rates to go? Because that should really inform your decision about whether or not you want to take that rate risk off the table by changing from variable rate of 06 to fixed. So,
Thank you, Dave Payne from PNC Capital Markets. Pleasure to be here and be part of the finance team. We're going to talk about PNC's interest rate forecast. We're also going to talk about what the general economy and economists think interest rates are going to do over the course of the next year to year and a half. And we're going to show some historical components of where short and long-term rates have been. And then we'll leave you with where the rates are currently. And it has been quite a change. As Mr. Beckett mentioned, the variable rate loan that we're looking to protect from rising interest rates, about a year ago was under 0.5%. And if you look on page 10, that's based off of that number that says 1 month LIBOR. It says current rate 2.11%. That is the movement from that 0.5 percentage point a year ago up to the current rate and what you're paying right now, which is a spread that brings it to an all-in rate of about 2.5%. We're forecasting that variable rate component on your current variable rate loan will move from 2.11% to 2.66% by the second quarter of 2019. So another 0.5 point rise in that interest rate. So if Mr. Beckett was here today and we had rates in the second quarter of 2019, the 2.5% rate that he based that negative $700,000 worth of savings off of, he now would be working that off of a 3% rate.
you'd be paying 3.5%.
Right, so it would be even higher, and that negative savings conceivably, well, it would be mathematically, would be down to about zero. The second thing that's important is the 10-year Treasury note rate, because the 10-year Treasury note rate is what we're basing our long-term rates on, the fixed interest rate for the new bond. And you can see that currently the 10-year Treasury is at 2.86. We're projecting that the 10-year Treasury by the second quarter of 2019 will be 3.16%. So that rate itself, we're expecting that that's going to go up 30 basis points, 0.3%. And the the rationale for where those two rates come together is if we were not to fix that rate risk now, conceivably, we're projecting the variable rate will be higher in the second quarter. And if in the second quarter, we fix the rate at that point in time, your long-term rate, which you will be required to hold for at least 8 years, will be 0.3% higher in the second quarter if we were to do the bond issue then. So we're at a point where we see the variable rate rising rapidly. And if you look at the chart, I know that this is 10,000 feet for some people who don't follow interest rates. The chart tells a very interesting story too as to long-term rates and short-term rates. The blue line is the long-term rate, the 10-year note. The black line is the short-term rate. You can see that beginning in 2009 through 2015, 2016, there was a big difference between the black and the blue line. That's because that's normal. Short-term rates, yeah, we'll need to go back 2 pages, right there. The big difference is normal in most interest rate yield curves because short-term rates are normally much lower than long-term rates. If you look at the very right-hand side of that chart, the blue and the black line are very close. That's called a flat yield curve. It doesn't happen often. And again, that is because your variable rate has been rising fast and long-term rates are still historically very low. So it's an interesting time, but it's an also very valuable time for you to consider fixing that rate. Because if it reverts back to historical norms, one of two things is gonna have to happen. That short-term rate's gonna have to go down, and the Fed's telling us that they're raising the Fed fund rate 5-6 times over the course of the next 6 to 12 months. So I don't think it would be the short-term rate coming down. It would have to be the long-term rates going back to normal levels, meaning they're gonna go up even higher. And by fixing the rate now, you protect yourself not only from rising variable rates, but you protect yourself from refunding this down the road when interest rates on the long-term part of the scale historically revert back to their norms, which would be higher than what this chart suggests. Pages 11, all this shows are, and I'll just use the color coding, this shows PNC's forecast. It shows what's called the street forecast, which is 60 to 70 different economists and where they think rates are going. And it also shows a median, which looks at the historical last 6 to 12 months and takes out a lot of the peaks and valleys on that 10-year treasury rate. PNC, we're a little bit more aggressive. We do think rates are going to bump up from right now of 310 to maybe a 338. The street sees it moving from somewhere around 305 to 318 in that period of time. And if you looked historically over the last 12 months, the implied forward rate is pretty flat at about 2.92. If you go to the bottom right-hand corner of page 11, you'll see where we think that they'll be a year from now. And they're pretty close in context. PNC at 318, the street at 338, and the implied forward at 292. That's about a quarter point higher than where they are right now. They will go up and down based on the news of the day, but for the most part, 60 to 70 economists, PNC internally, and the street see long-term rates rising. Page 12 is just a numerical representation of that. If you look at the 3-month LIBOR in the upper right-hand box with the green arrow, it's 232. Currently, we see that going up about 0.5 point by the third quarter of 19, up to 286. The same thing can be said for the lower half, which would be the Bloomberg Economic Survey, those 60 to 70 economists. They actually see a quicker spike in that 3-month LIBOR rate to 3.14. Page 13, just as I mentioned, all of these numbers simply state that the Fed, all the governors vote independently prior to a meeting. They plot where each individual governor of all the different Fed regions thinks interest rates are going to go, and they come up with a consensus. That 94% consensus is that in a couple of weeks, on September 26th, they believe that they're going to raise the targeted Fed funds rate to 2 to 2.25%. There are some possibilities in the November, December, and January meetings that they'll be moving that to 2.5%. And then the 2 3/4 and 3% ranges are in there for the March 19th meeting and the May of 2019 meeting. All indications are that through May of 19, the Fed fund rate will be rising. Page 14, this just again shows you the correlation between short-term rates and long-term rates. And I'll simply note that the dotted or the hashed green line at the left-hand side of the chart, that's at about 1.5%. That is the curve for municipal bonds, for high-grade municipal bonds called AAA MMD. It goes from 2 years out to 30. You would be concerned with basically the 2-year to 15-year flow of that line. And you can see that the difference between the dotted or the hashed green line and the historicals, which are the orange, blue, and black, on the short end of the curve is dramatically different. And that's what we basically witnessed in the last 12 months. Short-term rates have gone through the roof very quickly. And hence, the difference between that current rate and the historical on the short end, the 2, 3, 4-year part of the curve, is much different than it normally is. And you can see where it inverts, quite frankly, as you go out on the long end of the curve. Right now, you're at about a 12 to 14-year maturity on the 2006 variable rates. So you can see that the green hashed line is pretty much right on top of the historical average or the 10-year average orange line at about 12 years. What it also shows you is that long-term rates are below a 10-year average. A big reason for that, though, is you'll see that this chart, it goes back 10 years to 2008. If you'll recall that, this week is basically the 10-year anniversary of the Lehman Brothers crash and when financial markets went upside down. For a good 7 years following 2008, the Fed not only predicted interest rates, they used open market strategies of purchasing bonds to keep interest rates low for a very, very long period of time. Basically, it has had a 7-year run of the Fed buying bonds so that during this recovery, interest rates would be low for consumers. That artificially suppressed that 10-year average. So it's likely that without any more open market activity by the Fed, and they haven't utilized any in the last 2 years, and it's unlikely they're going to utilize any going forward for the next year or so, you can expect that that 10-year average rate is going to revert again back to the norm, which would be a higher rate on the long end of the curve. And if you were to refinance in 6 months or 12 months, and not at this point in time, that long-term rate will probably be, as we talked about, maybe 30, 40, 50 basis points higher down the road. And that's a rate that you'll be locked into for 8 years. If Mr. Beckett were to talk about the structure of these new fixed rate bonds, they're going to carry potentially what's called an 8-year call. And that call period is the promise to the new bondholders that they're going to get paid that long-term rate for at least 8 years. So if you can fix that rate now, instead of 6 months from now or 12 months from now, and save 30, 40, 50, or a half a percentage point, that's going to be built in for the next 8 years. If you were to wait and rates were to rise, you'd have to live with that higher rate for at least 8 years. I'll take any questions. I appreciate your studying of all the interest rate forecasts and the graphs.
And I would just wrap up on behalf of us so that we can ask questions literally on the whole of the package. That I appreciate so much what Tom and Dave have been putting here together to indicate that in the one issue, the 2006, where the interest rate nominally would be going up, you can see that there is a lot of protection there on the upside going forward, that we can lock in a fixed rate that's dependable, reduce our interest rate risk on that particular loan. Combine that with the savings that we will be getting immediately in cash from the refunding of the 2004 pension obligation bonds, for the most part, a little bit from the 2009 GO bonds. the ability to carry out our short-term capital requirements, as was stated in the budget, that we are now ready to bring forward the package to you for financing. All this package together is our proposal to try not only and deal with our immediate needs, but also to be very responsible fiscally in keeping our debt structures manageable, predictable going forward, and to enable us to have a little extra cash to be able to work with as we head into the 2019 budget. So at this point, we're all here for questions and look forward to answering.
So, thank you, Mr. President. So, this is about 1/3 of total debt. So, saying that, are you comfortable with the rest of the debt, knowing that the rates are gonna go up, and they've been going up, and, you know, I think the Fed is looking to, keep them the same. I think they said that it may go up at least one more time before the end of the year, perhaps. The rest of the 2/3 of the debt, the capital debt that we have, I mean, the whole debt that we have in the city, how would you, are you looking into the future coming back to us with some further adjustment or refinancing, or?
So there's a couple of answers to that question. The first answer is, if you were to take advantage and fix the 06 debt, all your debt, all that, 100% of your debt would be fixed rate, all right? And as Mr. Payne mentioned, in all of your debt financings, you make a variety of promises not to redeem that debt for any number of years. So what really drives whether or not we would look at refinancing a particular debt issue are two things. When is the redemption date? And what are the interest rates at the time you're looking to do it? Fortunately, in my examination, the city has, over the past 5 or 6 years, taken every opportunity to reduce the interest rates on its outstanding debt. So you have some issues from 2007 through 2017 that are fairly low interest rate, with one exception. There's one issue out there that is not callable, so that's the 07 issue, and it's gonna run through maturity because it was issued as 0 coupon bonds in 07. They can't be called.
Where is that?
Off the top of my head, they're fairly high. I wouldn't, they're in the 7% range, but you can't do anything about it because of the way it issued in 07.
Thank you, I got all the things, but I don't want to dominate the conversation.
Any of my other colleagues here? Mr. Zuko?
Yes, just one quick question. These are based off of PNC's rates, correct?
The forecasts are PNCs.
Yes.
The rates will be market rates. They'll be the investors who are purchasing your bonds. PNC would be the underwriter offering those bonds to investors. So it's not a loan type situation where PNC would set the rate for you. That's what they would do with a mortgage loan, a car loan, a bank loan. The rate will be set by the market at the day that we price. And the rates that Mr. Beckett is working off of are PNC and our co-underwriter, Stifel's, best estimates at where rates are today. So are these PNC's rates? There are expectations of where the market rate would be if you were to issue these bonds this week.
And they're subject to going up and down between now and the time you actually enter into a final bond purchase contract between your underwriters and the city. So
Would there be any advantage to exploring other banks' rates?
we put an RFP out to select these underwriters. We got 4 responses back, and a combination of Stifel Nicholas and PNC were both, in both cases, were very competitive rates, both in terms of the upfront fee as well as their estimate of where interest rates would be. In terms of banks, $27 million of fixed rate long-term debt, permanently fixed rate long-term debt, is typically not something that we see from banks, from commercial banks in terms of bank loans. More typical is the type of structure that we're refunding, and we recommend refunding in 06, which is a short fixed rate period followed by a long variable rate period.
Okay, thanks.
Ms. Muda?
You mentioned that if we don't do this now, the rates is gonna go up. Is that what you're saying?
What we're saying, no, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that the expectations of the last 6 months and the expectations of a lot of people on Wall Street and a lot of economists are, and the signals out of the Federal Reserve are that rates are gonna go up, short-term rates particularly. On the other hand, nobody can predict the future, least of all me.
Well, that's true.
So I'm not gonna say that rates are going to go up, but it's the experience of the last 6 months and all the indications coming from all the sources we look at are that it's likely that rates are going up. Because think about it, our economy's moving along pretty well. It's percolating really kind of net. It's roaring along, and when that happens, at the end of an economic expansion of 8 to 10 years, it's likely that the monetary authorities are gonna start tightening monetary policy by raising interest rates.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Muda. Mr. Robinson?
Thank you, Mr. President. In the discussion that we had last week, Mr. Hartzell, Mr. Beckett, one of the things that we talked about is that this is also with the 2006 lease buyback, that we're sort of cleaning up the books on this one. Because, can you maybe talk a little bit more about that and give us sort of a better explanation of that, please?
Sure. When we look at your debt, all of it looks like pretty standard municipal debt, general obligation bonds, fixed rate of the city. And when I looked through your financial statements, that one jumped out like a sore thumb. It was lease revenue bonds of an industrial development authority that the city had guaranteed payment on. So when the city guarantees payment on an obligation like that, it is tantamount, it is exactly like from the investor's perspective and from the state Department of Community Development and Economic Development perspective, exactly like that general obligation bond debt. So further, whenever we go to the rating agencies, they include that when they add up all the outstanding debt. So it's expensive, it's unwieldy, and it could potentially get more expensive down the road. So that's when we kind of said, given where the yield curve is, as Dave explained, it's flat, it's probably as good a time as any to consider fixing that out and taking that variable rate risk off the table. So, and it does clean up your balance sheet. There's not anything that looks very unusual going forward.
Thank you. Also, so we just had a presentation from you recently, and we were discussing the fact that we received, correct me if I use the incorrect language on this, a negative outlook from the rating agencies, from S&P and from Moody's. Is that the correct way?
That's correct.
Okay, that's what I thought, I want to make sure. So, let's just say for a minute, if we wouldn't do this today, if we go through next year and we run into an issue where we are downgraded, or we continue to have that, if we would need to refinance again in the future with this debt, how could that potentially affect us?
It would cost you, your savings on the 2004 would probably drop significantly. Your savings on the 2009 refunding would go away. And the amount it would cost you to fix that 2006 would go up. It just depends on the market, and it depends on where your rate would fall ultimately.
And I will also say, and then I have a question concerning it. I'm very happy to see, I was very happy on Friday when you told me, Mr. Hartzell, that the $1 million in savings we're looking to put back into the cash reserves. Because that's something that not only do we desperately need, but it's also something that the ratings agencies will look more favorably upon. So could you maybe give me an idea as to, obviously we know that the 800-pound gorilla in the room is fixing the structural deficit, which we will be addressing in a few weeks. But in terms of adding this $1 million back in and restructuring the debt, could you maybe discuss a little bit about how this type of a proactive approach would be looked upon by the ratings agencies when they go to do another rating?
You know, I think what I tend to talk about in those discussions with the rating agencies is prudent fiscal management. And one of the things that rating agencies look at is variable rate debt exposure. And they've started to look at it quite a lot more in the past 10 years than they used to. So by saying, look, we've taken any kind of contingency risk with that variable rate debt off the table, we've managed to take savings and we've put them into our rainy day fund, or for want of a better word. We've slightly increased our liquidity, which they pointed out is something that they're really concerned about. I don't think that this financing in and of itself is a driver of your credit. It's not. In fact, I've said to the rating agencies, I described what we were thinking about. And I said, look, I don't think this is a significant credit event. Do you agree? And they said, yeah, it's not going to push you one way or the other. The bigger issue is your structural deficit long term.
Right, but well, I think what I was trying to get at is.
It doesn't hurt.
Exactly, that's kind of what I was looking for in terms of that this is a sound financial management approach that is going to help with us when we go back. And then depending upon whatever happens in the next few weeks, this could either help with that or potentially mitigate if we don't do enough. So, great. And then I have some more questions, Mr. Hartzell, about the $1 million, but I'll save that for our next bill. So thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you. Mr. Glazer, our city controller.
If council members have questions, I'll certainly wait.
Mr. Hendricks has one.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Earl, Mr. Beckett, providing we do go through this and things work out just as we anticipate, or the experts anticipate, I would imagine that 6 months down the road, another year from now, we revisit this. This is something ongoing, let us say, statement.
Well, we're always going to look at opportunities to look to refinancing to try to get the minimum debt cost that we possibly can. And the advantage out of this is, as Mr. Beckett pointed out, is not only with the cash that will be available at this point, but also locking in essentially what our planned debt service is going to be on all of these issues for a long period of time, and being at a fixed rate. Obviously, if the market conditions were to improve, or I don't know if I would say improve, but certainly if rates were to come down, it would be something that we would need to look at. But in the meantime, I think we're looking at this as the timing issue is the best opportunity for us to minimize our debt service cost and to handle these issues responsibly financially.
Okay, thank you.
One last question for me. So you kind of led me into the question I had with regards to the debt service cost. We have had. Would that increase on debt service cost from 8 million to higher, or is it keep it the same? Or
It keeps it the same or reduces it.
It would keep the same as
Or reduces it.
It'll be over 8 million.
On the issues that we're talking about here, yes, it would, for the 2004, 2006, and 2009 issues, those debt service amounts are held constant or slightly improved from what we had forecast that we were going to be spending in those particular years on those items. There is new debt, obviously, for the 2018 short-term equipment loan, which is going to hit particularly in 2020, but
That's a 3.5 million.
yeah, exactly, and we'll have the first large portion of that will come in 2020, but in 2019, we have the final year of the previous 3-year, $6 million loan that is repaid. So essentially, while we're taking on a sizable new debt for 3 years in 2020, it's replacing an expired debt of about the same amount. So debt service in the aggregate will hold reasonably constant.
I'm a little confused in regards to, because I really wasn't sure how PNC, no offense to PNC, I'm sure you did great projections, but I was a little confused on how that came about, that you did an RFP, but I don't remember approving an RFP here. Did we do that? How did that happen?
Now, this was actually within the broader perspective of the RFP that brought NW Financial into the operation. It is a standard practice that when you have a financial advisor in there, that they can set up an RFP with the underwriters that are going to be considering for this particular practice. And so what he did was put together the package that enabled the underwriters to be able to compete for the business, and we had 4 responses. And those, it was from that both PNC and Stiefel ended up giving us a much better set of terms in terms of our long-term rates. But that is, as I've understood it, is something that's part of the usual package when you're putting together bringing underwriters in. The financial advisor would have the role of establishing that and setting the benchmarks that come with that. So that's why we set it up that way.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we should, I mean, I think we should have been advised so that just, you know, that's a
Fair point.
call kind of.
I accept that.
And I have one last question, I think this for Dave, but you missed the year, so if I remember it, I ask you later. But now I remember it. So your projection from PNC, when you go into the market and look at that, do you consider you will be the same or better than other, not talking about the fundings that they get, but I'm talking about just the projections. Would that be in the same line as other projection from what I'm sure you look at other analysts and other
We, on a daily basis, almost an hourly basis, review, and in this case specifically, review Pennsylvania market issuance. We are a very large participant in the Pennsylvania municipal bond market. We put out a lot of PA municipal paper, and we also look at what the competitors are putting out. When we make projections to submit to the city and to Mr. Beckett, we obviously take into consideration not only our results, but the results of other underwriters who are underwriting City of Wilkes-Barre, City of Bethlehem, City of Pittsburgh. We look at different ratings. You brought up the rating aspect of it. If one of those comparisons has a higher rating than you, they probably got a little bit lower rate. And we do a pretty in-depth analysis so that when we give interest rate thoughts out, and that's what we did for the RFP process, the first question that Mr. Beckett had as part of that process was, how'd you come up with this? Exactly what you're asking. And we basically turned over to him. So the question for Mr. Beckett was your question when we produced our rates. How'd you come up with these? And we basically showed him all of our factual information, which was probably the last 4 or 5 deals that we did in Pennsylvania with characteristics like the cities. And then we looked at competitors' deals from Pennsylvania, and then a couple that were comparable throughout the United States, and said, we think we can get these rates. As Tom mentioned on interest rate forecasts, nothing's guaranteed, but we're one of the leading underwriters in Pennsylvania and nationwide for municipal debt, specifically cities and townships and boroughs. So when we give a thought on where we think the rates are going to be at a particular point in time, we're pretty close to that if other characteristics don't change from now until when we price those bonds.
So when are you looking, putting those bonds into market?
There's a calendar right here. You want to go over that, Tom?
Go forward one page, Mike.
There's our, right there, 17.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Thank you, I missed that.
Basically, we are waiting until you enact an ordinance and decide to move forward with this. That ordinance will establish minimum parameters for the financing. And once that happens, we'll publish an official statement, and then a couple weeks after that, we will actually the PNC will actually sell the bonds in the marketplace and come to the city's administration with a contract to purchase. And at that point, your rates are locked in, and then we just get a closing after that. So that pre-pricing is tentatively scheduled for the first week of October. It may slip a week or so.
Okay. All right. Last question. We talked about this before, and I just want to hear your opinion, particularly from you, both of you, Mr. Beckett and Mr. Harsel. We do, we talked about doing some investment, we expect the rates to go up, okay? And some of this investment that we can actually make that are safe enough for the city to do. Are we looking into that possibility as well, through this process?
Not through this particular process, this is to refinance the debt. What we're doing via our banking relationship with TD and our investment relationship with Manning and Napier is taking our available pooled cash to the maximum prudent extent, and deploying that into short-term investments that are very liquid, very short-term, and trying to secure the maximum interest rate that we can on those to provide some additional investment income. So we are working very actively on that. The Manning and Napier work that we've been doing, we started that project finally in August, and we have $3 million that we have provided to them for that investment purpose that has varying rates of from terms of the investments from 4 months to about 1.5 years. And as we continue to get some return data coming in from that, I will update you regularly on how that's coming out.
Yeah, I mean, just, I belong to another organization that we just did that, and we have some CD that we have to include investment. We were getting 0.5, 0.7%. We were able to ask the bank, just ask them, what would you give us? They actually give us 2.1%. That's about $6,000-7,000 a year.
Absolutely. And our relationship with TD is such that we're seeing a pretty decent rate of return on what we're putting into our account with them. So we're constantly watching that.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry.
Sure. Anybody else from council?
Mr. President, I have one thing that I forgot to ask, and it's concerning Mr. Hartzell. What we had discussed last week about the $1 million that's going to be used to leverage potential grant funding from PennDOT for road construction work. Could you just discuss what will happen if we do not utilize that full $1 million, and what would happen to the remaining cash if we would not receive grant funding from that?
We obviously would, that is going to remain as part of the capital expense. And so the intention would be that we want to leverage that as much as we can possibly to be able to secure additional grants for larger transportation projects from the state, larger public works projects. But that would still be remaining there as part of that capital, with the intention, I think, primarily that we would continue to use that as leverage for securing larger grants, because that's what that $1 million is intended to be there for.
Excellent, thank you. I just thought it was worth bringing that up. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. One quick question. Putting it very simply, if this goes through in October, in January, are we paying more or less per month? If we're paying per month, let's say we were paying per month, are we paying more on this or less?
In the aggregate, we are paying right constant with where we're at right now.
Okay, thank you. Okay, seeing nobody else from, I'm sorry, our controller, Mr. Blazer. I try not to forget you, but.
I believe you. Just to follow up on the last question that Ms. Robinson had, the $1 million is really for reimbursement to the Commonwealth, is for future projects. It's nothing that we're on, that we owe them now for current projects.
Correct.
Okay. Mr. Hartzell has stated earlier that the city had budgeted and expected to do a short-term loan, and that is in fact in the detailed budget for 2018. And the items that they listed on the short-term loan for 2018 are in the budget, in the 83 account, under rolling stock, and also on computer equipment. My question, sir, is this loan is expected to close at the end of October. So purchasing will be done after the loan closes?
We have actually anticipated that and have made requisitions ahead of time and tried to scale them out with the anticipation that when the loan was approved, that we would be ready to make the purchases. So the requisitions have been in the queue for quite a while.
I've really only seen one for the item 13, the F-550, to this point in time.
Okay.
you know, if I can offer my opinion, having some certainty and taking, you know, risk off the table by going to fixed rate stuff is a good idea, giving the climate going forward. Your debt service payments are expected to be the same, so that's a win, and you get to put a little bit of money aside into your cash reserve, and that's also a win. So, that's what your controllers are. Thank you, Mr. Hartzell.
And we value our controller's opinion. Thank you. Okay, any members of the public on Bill 60?
Thank you, Mr. President. Berger from the east side of Allentown. My first question is, what is the current city bond rating? Are we a A+ or B-? What is our credit rating right now?
Our bond ratings right now with Standard & Poor's are an A+, and with Moody's it's an A3, which is in the lower part of the A range.
This bond issue, was this a negotiated bond issue or an advertised bond issue? What is this considered? A negotiated bond issue or an advertised bond issue?
I think that the colloquial term is a negotiated sale, but for DCD purposes,
It has been proven that advertised bond issues get you lower rates, do they not?
can we get on that?
It's been proven that advertised bond issues get you lower rates, interest rates.
I've been in the business for about 30+ years, and I have yet to see a compelling academic argument either way for what you're talking about is a competitive sale versus a negotiated sale.
Well,
I think the question is, when to use that tool. I think that it probably, in my experience again, probably is a preference for higher rated credits in that AAA and AA rated, and for shorter types of maturities. The other thing that I think that anytime you have any type of unusual structure, in this case, we're issuing taxable debt versus normal tax exempt debt, you probably need to have somebody.
When I served on city council, I should have saved the papers. It's been proven that advertised bid for a bond, sale bonds, bring lower rates. I wish I'd have kept that stuff. I didn't keep it on my phone. The same council, a lot of information. I wish I'd kept that, but it shows that advertised bids save you money. Are these bonds sold already that PNC has?
No, they are not.
They're not sold. Okay. Are we gonna get this bond issue audited? When I'm serving the city council, we always had a CPA from audit the bond issue. Make sure what these people present are accurate. Are we gonna have an auditing firm research review this?
Well, in many, you're probably right, that in many cases, in refunding bond issues, you'll have an independent, what's called a verification agent to verify that the cash flows are sufficient to refund the existing debt. In this case, since we are currently redeeming debt, we don't need that independent CPA verification.
I think council should have this audited before, because I didn't hear out too much information on the savings when you compare it to the cost of this bond issue. Does it council have information what the full cost of this bond issue minus, the savings minus the cost? You just get a breakdown?
Yeah, we just
Can
don't-
you make a comment?
The issuance is about,
It's not in the book.
Yes, and what we showed at the beginning and around page 5 and page 6, we show out all of the costs by each individual bond issue as to what the overall debt will be, what the overall costs for financing that debt are going to be, where we get the savings from. It's all laid out in very thorough detail.
that's my question.
A part of the cost, we also have on page number, has listed everybody. That's also part of the cost. Was that included in your illustration on cost? In other words, on page 19, we have all these out-of-town people, bond counsel, financial advisor.
Yes, all of those are part of the cost on page 5, yes.
I mean, we hire all out-of-town people. I mean, it's more costly than normally we would hire local people. When do we hire local?
Our goal at this point, when we have, when we brought on NW Financial, was that our overriding goal was trying to minimize the costs of doing our debt service and our overall cost of doing business. And the companies that we have involved with this, they may not have a direct presence in a couple cases in Allentown, but they're all in Pennsylvania. And they're all knowing the market very well, and they're trying to get us the most reasonable cost that we can get to deal with our financing issues, and I'm perfectly fine with that.
You are, okay, but I think,
Thank you, Mr. Hirschman.
I think council has to look into this. And my final question, give me 15
Mr. Hirschman.
15 seconds.
You had extra time.
I know,
You didn't start the clock.
Council.
Mr. Hirschman, please.
That's why we're in debt, right?
Give him an extra couple minutes.
He had extra at the beginning.
It's a very short. One sector South Allentown. One thing I seen on the chart, I was, you brought a chart out on fixed future rates. Have you, is there another chart for variable rates projected out other than, that would be the LIBOR rate? The LIBOR number, is that the only one?
If you look at the arrow there, the green arrows are pointing to
Yeah, that's only kind of.
projected future variable rates.
The 3-month LIBOR arrow, so page 12.
Yeah, okay, I have that. You know, when you go back to what the city's been borrowing, council has to look at what the trend is here. You go back to 12, we had a $200 million input for the water and sewer. That wasn't good enough. You go down to 2015, we had a $26 million bond over 2 different series, plus a $6 million loan. That wasn't good enough. Go down to 16, another 2.5 million. Now, there's some defeasing in here. Don't get me wrong. You go down to last year in 17, another 9 million. And now you're gonna do 30 million, plus 1 or whatever. What is that debt gonna be? What's our total debt? According to the CAF report, we're about 98 million. It's almost as high as our budget. I mean, is this gonna go to 130, or is this, what's gonna be the total debt
No,
due up next year?
The debt right now is about $93 million, and the same apples to apples number is about $98 million after this financing. That includes.
So next year, when I look at the debt here on the CAF report, it's gonna show about 98 million again. So you're stretching, are you stretching, here the payments on these are gonna stretch out to the latest, what is it, 2034? Every one of these is gonna go out to 2034?
No, sir.
Just as they break off 20?
Each component's gonna go to its original maturity date. So if you look at page 8, that shows you that. So we are not doing any kind of financial engineering here, any stretching out or throwing anything down. Sorry to take your time, sir.
And selling this on a $1 million in your pocket. I mean, the first 2006 loan, I mean, they didn't hold true. I mean, council didn't hold true to the mayor at that time to actually do what that was supposed to do, be paid off in 2016. There's no guarantees that your guys, your system's gonna be locked in here for, 8 years? I think you can't repeat this at all for 8 years. None of this. So you're fixed at 4% for 8 years or something around there.
Yeah.
You can't get out of this and redo this. You can do something else. So, getting back to the 2006 one, they're gonna jump from a 2.5% roughly now, what you're paying for about 4%. And if you look at these numbers roughly, you have about another year or so. I would think of tearing that out of here. Tear that $7 million out of this actual bond issue. That's all.
If I may, that's a question, you can say that. That's a question that I asked Mr. Hartzell today in regards to just the what is it called, stabilization fund, that we can, audit it from this bond. I mean, this possibility, I don't think is, the whole projections that we have included that one.
We have, and wait, Commissioner.
Go right ahead, go right ahead.
And I appreciate that, because this, we suspected was going to be part of the discussion. I fully expected, not only Mr. Hunsaker, but Mr. Hahn had indicated, that this was going to be an issue, possibly. I think with what you have heard, particularly from Mr. Payne, waiting on this even for a year, the likelihood that we're gonna see a 4% fixed rate a year from now is not very good. That fixed rate is going to also go up if we were to do this. So we're chasing the tail of the dog, as it were, that if we decide to wait a year, it won't be 4% fixed rate debt, it'll be 4.5% fixed rate debt. So I very much understand the concerns Hunsaker raises that we are, practically speaking, on the 2006 loan, doing that fixed rate procedure as a means of reducing interest rate risk in the long term and not as an immediate savings. But I think with what's been presented tonight, we made a very compelling case that that is going to be the more prudent way to go in refinancing the 2006 debt.
If I can add
Thank you
to
very
that.
much.
This rate presupposes, this rate now is based on our rating. If you wait for a year, not only do you have the interest rate risk that Mr. Hartzell discusses, but you have to make the assumption that the city and council deals with the structural deficit in a way that inspires confidence in the rating agencies. Now, you guys haven't had to make those decisions yet. And I can't predict, as none of us can, how that's gonna turn out. You know, if we deal with it in a forthright manner, the rating stays good and you just have to deal with the interest rate environment next year. If council doesn't deal with it in a forthright manner and some of the structural deficit remains, the bond rating goes down, and no matter what the interest rate environment is next year, we're gonna get whacked with higher interest rates.
I agree with you, and the other thing is, our bond rating, although it's an A+, is actually with a negative outlook. Because of the lack of having a good, amount of money in that risk, fund.
All right, thank you, guys.
I just wanted
That was an answer to your question. Those were answers to your question, Mr. Hunsaker.
What he was saying, really, don't, hey, forget it. You're not interested in it? What can we say?
We are interested, don't tell us we're not. Come on.
Well, then you should take.
But we have to have some control of this meeting too. It's not gonna go on forever.
$30 million,
We've
you
got
got
other
an extra,
things.
extra 5 minutes.
And we're gonna talk about it again, and you know that
Yeah, but
very
by that
well.
time, you're already entrenched, you're already there. You gotta do this ahead of time, so you have more thoughts on this stuff. And
Well, we will be on the side.
What I was gonna say about was that the 2006 loan basically was, you're still gonna be paying the principal down this year, I hope. So even though their interest goes up, you're gonna be paying on less amount of money. So if it goes from 7, if they don't pay anything, which they haven't on some of these cases, yes, that argument's great.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but we see the interest rates going up for whatever reason.
And we
Economy's
are
stronger,
paying
so
down
the
principal and
Fed's
interest
right.
as scheduled for 2018 at the current rate on that loan. Yes.
So the chance of it being, Mr. Hunsaker,
One thing
please.
about the variable rate, what is your projection next year? You said, right now we're paying 2.5, is that including the 40 basis points?
Yes, it is.
And next year, you're gonna be paying what?
No. What Mr. Payne went to describe was what we expect, what the market expects, that base rate, that LIBOR rate, to be higher by a significant amount next year.
It's about 0.5.
By half of it.
About 0.5, according to your chart.
Right.
And that's not just your
That's not
prediction.
that much.
No, that's not just you sitting there saying that.
It is on potential.
Okay. Anybody else on Bill 60?
My follow-up question is, what, do the rules change on the stabilization fund when it gets turned over to this new bond? Does it automatically become the loan fund, the escape fund to where there's money? Or now, do all the rules and regulations around what the initial intent for that stabilization fund, now that it's gonna be turned into another bond, What are the rules and regulations?
I think you're just a little bit ahead of the game, because we have Bill 59, I think, that discusses that. So, which we'll be getting to, hopefully.
And I want to assure Mr. Hahn in this case that the existing provisions of the stabilization fund as to the amount that needs to be there, the amount that needs council approval, the reality that that money needs to be returned to the treasury for calendar year, all of that remains in place and stays exactly the same as is.
And that would be my opinion also. Thank you. Anybody else from the public on Bill 60? Seeing nobody. Mr. Hanlon, Bill 58. Oh, yeah.
I'll make a recommendation that we move forward favorably to full council.
I'll second that, Mr. President.
Okay. Do we need a vote then, Mr. Hanlon?
By common consent?
Common consent.
Computer's gonna shut down shortly because I'm getting an update.
Glad I'm here.
All right, Bill 58 amends the 2018 capital fund budget to provide for supplemental appropriation of $1 million from the proceeds of the 2018 short-term loan.
Okay. This is the provision that will enable the Public Works Department to leverage funding to secure larger state grants, construction projects going forward.
Thank you very much. Any comments or questions from my colleague?
Mr. President.
Mr. Roberts?
Mr. Ross, maybe I'm confused. I thought that pertaining to Mr. Glazier's question, that this was going to be the $1 million that's been already budgeted.
Yeah, there was, when we put the capital plan together, there was an uncertainty as to how much was going to go in as part of this leveraging to happen. And so that one particular item out of the whole bunch was not in the capital plan as included in the budget, but was anticipated as part of the short-term loan. So we're now making that, we're closing that hole.
Okay, so then this $1 million from Bill 58 is going to be for Public Works to leverage funding from the state?
Yes.
Okay, so then we're not concerned with any of the rolling stock or non-rolling stock
There's
issues?
nothing to do with those.
Okay, I just wanted to verify that. And the budgeted amount that we have in the, that this debt's going towards, is the necessity of moving this have anything to do with the fact that we had to make the correction due to the previous administration's mix-up from 15, 16 years ago and the $3.5 million that we just voted on, I believe, either last week or 3 weeks ago?
Nothing to do with that.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Hartzell. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. Robinson, anybody else from council? Seeing nobody, anybody from the public on Bill 58? Seeing nobody, do I have a motion?
I'll make the motion to move this forward to the full council favorably, Mr. President.
Do we have a second? Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Afo, for a second. Common consent? Thank you. Bill 59, please, Mr. Hanlon.
Bill 59 amends the administrative code, Article 13028, Financial Procedures Stabilization Fund by deleting Section 9, requiring the loan which created the stabilization fund to be paid off prior to the expiration of the fixed interest rate of the loan or within 10 years, whichever occurs sooner. And this would bring the section into compliance with the proposed refinancing of the debt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hartzell.
As has been talked about quite often by many of the regulars who have been concerned about the 2006 stabilization fund loan and how it was either marketed or how it was intended to be done. There was a provision in the initial law that was that the bond, that the bank loan would be paid off within 10 years at the time the variable rate kicked in. The initial bank loan package from what was then Wachovia, then eventually Wells Fargo, et cetera, did not allow for, however it was written, did not allow for any prepayment on that loan, and it had a 25-year life to it. So that contract clearly went against the intentions of what was in the statute, and it kind of held us up, as it were, to have to pay out the loan in the current time frame that we got on it to 2031. With Wells Fargo now indicating an interest in trying to clean that loan off the books and being very favorable to us pursuing the refinancing on the loan that we're considering, I thought it would be appropriate in terms of the ordinance to realize that we need to continue paying this loan out to 2031, because simply if we were to have to try to pay the entirety of it immediately, as the statute says, that would be a $7.6 million item, and we do not have the cash to pay for that immediately. And so, to be consistent with the proposal here in financing, I wanted to be transparent in the statute to indicate that we need to allow this particular issue to be paid off in a longer period than 2016, and that's why we bring this forward to you. The rest of the stabilization fund as the ordinance exists right now will remain in place.
Thank you very much. Put it up to council. Seeing nobody.
Hey, that's one quick, easy. I just wanted to make sure that,
I didn't want to wait.
out of that stabilization fund will be used as well as a funding that we use to say, hey, this is how much money we actually have in our funding in case there's a risk management issue.
The stabilization fund as it exists right now, what we have shown in the financial statements, the fund itself is statutorily established at $4.8 million. We have practically increased that to about a little over $5.2 million over the last 12 years, because it is prudent for us to show the interest that's been accumulated on that account and really consider that part of the broader stabilization fund. Nothing in the ordinance that is suggested here will change the intent of it, will change the anything as far as the provisions about using it and having to repay it immediately. All of those provisions remain in place.
So it's talking about what, 5.2 million?
Yes.
That's all, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Anybody else from council? Mr. Blue?
No, sir.
Public on Bill 59?
Frank Keller, 2726 Park Street, Habitat. If this is out of order for the subject of this, please advise. However,
If it's not on Bill 59, it's out of order.
okay, well, relating to how these refinancings and changes in the stabilization fund and, you know, the $1 million equipment fund and all that, just globally, the pension bonds as being part of this, at times, it's been discussed here at council about state aid being calculated with the pension bonds being part of it, and also the EIT tax.
Mr. Keller, are you going to come to this Bill 59? Because right now you're not anywhere near it.
Okay, all right, well, I guess that's about the best I can do then.
Okay, sorry about that, but yeah, we're on Bill 59 tonight. Thank you. Anybody else? Seeing nobody, do I have a motion?
Make a motion that we move Bill 59 forward favorably to school council.
I'll second
that.
Mr. Hendricks will yield to Ms. Moda, so we have Ms. Moda for a second. Common consent?
Yes.
Okay. That ends this meeting. We will now move into the administrative and Human Resources Administration and appointments.
Thank you, members.
Thank you, Mr. Earl.
Thank you all.
We're gonna take a minute to Mr. Hendricks, for a second. And then we will start the. Oh, it's okay. We don't care about it. We're gonna start the budget procedures for committee review. We'll start with our solicitor's office. Who's our solicitor? Brad Tomlin, are you coming up here to address this? Mr. Hamlin, I think I'm saying this back.
All right.
Shorthanded. All right.
Helped work on the project, and I was fine, and she read me my rights, and everything, I was surprised about that.
No, Mr. Hamlin's taking notes.
Excuse me, sir. Sir, we're starting a meeting here.
Yeah, also, Mike says it's not starting the meeting. Sorry, Matt.
I was just getting time check, maybe 5 minutes.
Oh, up and running, so you're taking notes? All right. Okay, once again, you can start.
Yes, sir. Good evening, everyone.
Is your mic on, huh? I want to get through this. I don't hear you that well. Do you hear that?
Good evening, members of City Council. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you this evening on behalf of the City Solicitor's Office to give you an overview of our accomplishments for 2018 and our goals and objectives for 2019. As for our accomplishments, we submit that they are legion, but necessarily and appropriately go unnoticed. We've maintained operations through extensive period of leadership absence and transition. We've had 3 city solicitors in the last 10 months. We provided highly cost-effective legal services daily to all city departments and to the mayor and to city council. We've given extensive assistance to maintain the continuity and smooth flow of government operations in accordance with the Home Rule Charter and the applicable law through the unique legal challenges impacted the city over the last several years. Getting legal advice from our office on a myriad of daily issues that arise, as opposed to going to outside counsel.
Excuse me 1 minute. Officer, could you either close the door or ask them to please keep it down low? Thank you. I'm sorry.
Yeah, continue.
Continue, yes.
Giving legal advice from our office on a myriad of daily issues that arise, as opposed to going to outside counsel, has saved the city large amounts of money. For instance, one law firm was paid the sum of $362,920 in total in 2017. This same firm has been paid $91,000 so far in 2018. The total expenditure report for legal fees and costs so far in 2018 is at $439,896. The City Solicitor's Office has 4 attorneys and 3 paralegals for a total staff of 7 people. Our accomplishments are measured in numbers, in statistics. For contracts finalized in 2017, there were 185. To the present, in 2018, there are 118. In terms of right to know requests answered and appeals defended, in 2017, there were 704. In 2018, until today, are 587. Formal legal service requests, or LSRs, not including daily questions, were 145 in 2017 and 111 so far this year. Municipal liens filed and mortgage stats and mortgage modifications run 600 in each of those years. Liens satisfied that were filed, lien satisfactions that were filed were 50 in both years. Subpoenas for department records this year were 45. Tax certifications are filled out and completed for real estate transactions and the like on a daily basis. Imagine the cost if only a small part of these tasks were sent out. Our proudest accomplishments, however, are how we synergize. We engage in creative cooperation and in teamwork with the departments to find sensible solutions to problems. Our accomplishments are realized elsewhere. Our department does not make or collect money. We synergize. We offer support to the departments that request it or need it. For example, from 2016 to 2018, Attorney Scott Holbert in our office assisted the Revenue and Audit Department in the collection of delinquent business privilege taxes. With the combined effort of Attorney Holbert, Tricia Thickard, and Seth O'Neill, the collections are up by 10%, or over $500,000 this year. The entire city has been under stress since the FBI served a warrant in July of 2015, and the mayor and city council have collectively committed to a period of healing. There has been an absence of leadership or nominally transitional leadership in the solicitor's office for going on 1 year, a period of 10 months. Our goals, aspirations, and ideals for 2019 can best be stated or summarized in 3 related concepts, which we hope Mayor O'Connell and the full city council will embrace. Professionalize, recognize, reorganize. Professionalize. The solicitor's office needs a full-time administrative executive experienced in municipal law for leadership, whether selected from the inside or not. To be the captain of the city team. We look forward to a complete change in the mindset to assure succession planning. Succession planning. In the solicitor's office into the future, rather than the appointment of an attorney not committed to the future well-being, efficiency, and competencies of the office in dealing with the many challenges that lie ahead. In our humble view, the stepping stone solicitorship should stop. Professionalize, recognize, reorganize. Recognize. The office is blessed with an abundance of seasoned talent. Attorney Kloiber has been a practicing attorney in the Common Pleas Court and in the Commonwealth Court as a judicial clerk, and in the solicitor's office of Berks County and in the city of Bethlehem for 18 years. I've been in practice for 36 years, and I don't know how on earth that happened. With 15 of the most recent years in municipal work. There's a structural benefit to having experience we have, and we should not be treated as a given. Professionalize, recognize, reorganize. Reorganize is having a plan coordinated by Mayor O'Connell and his staff and the city council to implement the first 2 ideals in the spirit of healing and going forward. If there's ever a time to reorganize the city solicitor's office in anticipation of fulfilling the goals, the city goals in 2018, we submit respectfully, this is it. Thank you for your time and attention, and I'd be happy to try to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Do I have any questions for my colleagues? Mr.
I don't have a question, but I just want to comment. I want to thank Fran and the whole staff in the solicitor's office for everything they do for us. And you said it, I mean, 3 city solicitors in less than a year. That's not easy to work through, but you guys are doing it, so thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else? And also, I have, Fran, what we're talking about here is the solicitor's part-time. Is this the only department that really doesn't have a director as such?
Yes, that's correct.
Full-time, yeah. And I think it would be nice to consider that we would hire a full-time solicitor, a director, someone that can direct this department. We have, like you said, in a year, we've had 3 different solicitors, so if we could get one, it's gonna be really tough for you guys. And I agree with Mr. Hamlin that you're doing one hell of a job, so I think one of the things we should really look at is hiring a full-time solicitor.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Just a quick question. Saying that, what would you say the amount of solicitors needed for the city we hire? If you were to look into the aspect of having a full-time solicitor, how many do you see in that office? I mean, how many would you project that we need in the reorganization if we were to go?
I concept, we would want to work with city council, with the administration, the mayor and his staff, in reorganizing in a way that's efficient, recognizes the competencies, and could lessen the amount of work that's sent to outside councils, to the extent that we can handle it within. There are certain cases that we have pending right now are significant in terms of time and energy to defend against. So those certainly would be considered to be outsourced. But to the extent that we can keep them in would be, certainly a benefit to the city.
Probably I didn't say my question correctly. What I mean is, right now we have 4 solicitors. If we were to reorganize and have a full-time solicitors, how many the other part-time solicitors do you think you need?
Well, we have 3 full-time assistant solicitors now. Attorney Camacho is part-time. He's in charge of the contracts, which is a very time-intensive and knowledge-intensive area. It's a huge area. And we have 3 paralegals. So if we could maintain the staff we have now with the full-time chief solicitor and keep the competencies within their ranges, and we put out notice in the beginning of the year to the various departments of who is in charge of certain areas, so that way there's not duplication of effort. There's a contact person that a department head can go to directly without having to filter through various people. So we would hope that in cooperation and in thinking this through, understanding these are conceptual ideas, to come to a sensible solution about how many we might need. And with the idea that, litigation, the LCA matters, the other types of matters are going to accelerate in the coming time. So that's where we would need the assistance and the guidance. A lot of the time and effort that we're spending, and I'm not being critical, and I don't mean to be disrespectful to anyone, is that a lot of the managerial administrative tasks we're doing as a collective group, which lessens our time to do serious matters of legal import. I'm signing payroll, we're doing, we need leadership on, managing cases with outside counsel, when to settle, when not to. Those types of things that we've been doing on a group basis, and I can't tell you how grateful I am to have the collaborative group that we have. Attorney Holbert, Attorney Kloiber, and myself, Juan, Attorney Camacho, we all work, we have weekly meetings to make sure now that everyone is abreast of who's working on what, which we never had before. So this is something that we hope that we can get some traction on, to have, only for the betterment of the representation for the residents and for certainly council and for the administration and the mayor. That's our hope. And of course, it's going to be a collaborative effort with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else from Mr. Robinson? Thank you, Chairman Offa. Thank you, Mr. Ruth, for your presentation, and also to echo the sentiments that have been stated here. The staff in the office has gone through a great deal, not just over the last few years with the investigation, but specifically in the last 10 months, between the mayoral selection process, 3 different solicitors, and all the lawsuits that we're dealing with. And I think you guys have been doing a fantastic job, and we're very lucky to have the staff that we do.
Thank you for that.
Has the staff looked into the aspect of if we would want to go and make this a full-time position? If there would be any necessary changes to the home rule charter, or if under the provisions of the charter we could just change the position from a budgeting standpoint?
We've looked at that. Mr. Robinson, we haven't come to any firm conclusion.
Okay.
We know that the solicitor's office is established by charter.
Mm-hmm.
We know by rule and by charter that the city solicitor has to be a resident or a taxpayer. To what extent a taxpayer? Is it LST, EIT? What type of tax in the state? We haven't come to any firm conclusion on whether there would be any legislative action, either charter change or perhaps a code change to make it a full-time.
Okay.
That certainly would be something within this collaborative effort that we would need to address.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mr. Ruth. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Is there anyone else? Anyone from the public? Seeing none, we, this part of the solicitor's office presentation is over. And thank you.
May I be excused from the meeting?
Yes. Sorry, we don't open to the public, so if you come up here, you have to sit back down again. Thank you, Fran. Next would be the controller, that would be Jeff Glazer.
Thank you. Briefly, I don't expect any budget change, for next year. Some of our accomplishments this year is we continue to post contracts on the web. In addition, on our monthly check reviews, which I report on here, if you go on the web, the list of all the accounts payable checks are also posted. They're just posted in a PDF form at the time being. We're hoping that in the future we can make it searchable. We continue to do bank recs every month. I report to council on the major and minor audits that we do. Most recently, of course, with our great internship program. We did a very thorough and hopefully thought-provoking audit on parking ticket revenue that our police department does. Additionally, this year, the department did a significant budget analysis looking at what was budgeted versus what was actually spent. And I hope that information will bear fruit as we go into the 2019 budget. And additionally, my office reviews POs on a weekly basis to make sure that the money's coming out of the proper accounts. Looking forward to next year, we intend to do everything we're doing this year. We'd like some additional authority to do audits. I realize that that's really got to be a charter change. I think this is probably the only organization that where the controller has to ask permission to audit something, as opposed to it's expected that we can pretty much look at anything that we wish to. And the other thing, at the moment that we'd like to do for 2019 is past controllers have had to sign off on transfers. That somehow disappeared about 3.5 years ago. And I think it would be a good idea if council and or the administration would put that back in. And, previously the controller would have to sign off on it before it even went to council. So that's something that I think we should look at for 2019. And that's the long and short of it.
Thank you.
Obviously, that wasn't in the charter then, that was just something that was done administratively.
Yes, and I don't know if the administration would be agreeable to reinstituting it, or if it's something that should really be done by ordinance. Unfortunately, Fran left, so.
I would think it should be an ordinance, that way it can't be at the whim of whoever's.
And I would certainly be amenable to that.
All right, thank you, that's all I have.
Okay. Anyone else on that list? Any of my colleagues?
Okay. Listen, we have a great controller, so.
Okay. Yeah, let's all say yay for Jeff. Thank you, Mr. Glazer. Next, we have the information system. We have our IT director, Matt Leiber. You're on.
Thank you. So I think you know where my time was spent this year, cleaning up a malware incident from February. And I looked at my project list that I brought in here last fall this time, and we did tick off a few boxes. But the large ones that are going to save us money and dig us out of this hole that we find ourselves in, it's very depressing to sit here and listen to what Fran Truworth has gone through as well. And I think I hear it across all departments, because IT obviously touches everybody. So I sort of take a little comfort in that, because we didn't have a great year. However, I am more confident than ever that we've been doing the right things. We're spending the, dollars wisely that you approved earlier this year. We've got that licensing that we all debated back in August. And, we're only 2 weeks into that all those things got turned on. So there's a lot of transition going on in IT right now. But, our mission is to extract the maximum value out of every one of those dollars and all of those licenses, so that when I hear somebody like Fran Truworth, and it could be anybody sitting in this seat, but the volume of legal service requests for information, we have given them tools in the last 3 years to pull that stuff that used to actually be done in my department by, my staff. And now we put those tools in their hands. We're trying to get them up to speed to, make sure they're keeping what they need to keep for subpoenas and records requests and all that. Unfortunately, they're in the same position we are. Maybe there's not enough hands to do the work. That, the volume of work is absolutely increasing. And that is if you had to take a theme away of, I have no surprises financially for you in this budget. I'm relatively, I don't want to say it's going to be flat because it probably won't be, but I'm not adding any new services at this point. We've added all that licensing and for securing this organization and setting it on a path that's going to keep it secure into the a whole decade ahead at this point. And that's actually a very good place to be in. It's just that we're 2 weeks into it at this point. So I will be asking the mayor for staff additions. I liked what I heard Fran say with, reorganize. I think I got the order wrong. Recognize, reorganize, and what was the other R? Professionalize, exactly. So our processes as well are changing, is the point to that. And whether you want to call it professionalizing, but having worked with a small IT shop here for, you could say the last decade, but certainly the last 3 years, we've gone with at least 1 or 2 positions unfilled. I have ads out right now to fill at least one vacancy that I've carried all this time because I was waiting for a job study that I don't know the status of that, but I'm not waiting for it any longer, I can tell you that. I'm doing my own studies and coming up with my own plan at this point as far as what is it going to take to reorganize our IT shop to align with, what I hear everybody else is asking for in this budget, what you're likely to fund and support, but it's things that you're all interested in, which the big data stuff that we talked about last year, because data is going to drive your decisions into the next decade. If you read my email from earlier this week and actually signed yourself into the new Office 365 world, you'll see that whole video portal there. That wasn't only a test to see if our employees can get in there and poke around, but that can turn into a whole learning management system that when you get onboarded as a new employee in this organization, that you can be given a sort of a playlist of here's what you need to know based upon your job description, and really be accountable for, did we train you, and get it off paper in HR world. I know Melanie, I've had 2 brief meetings with her at this point, but I am absolutely laying the groundwork for all of these good things to happen. Credit card processing was on the list. So we're enabling good things to happen. I think it's going to take some people, because we absolutely don't have enough. I hear the message loud and clear from my colleagues that IT is obviously not responding these days fast enough. But I don't want to do a reorganization this fall, and it's going to be in the budget. I'm not showing up this month after being here 2 months ago. I can't work that fast either. So on the cost savings front, to offset the staff that I am going to ask for, I can tell you our print services contract, we let that expire this year because we ended up purchasing our hardware and out of our equipment fund, and we'll save about $100,000 a year right there. by not, probably more, by buying equipment that we already purchased in-house, so it's already here, no new expenditures, we're just not spending that money anymore. So that comes out of my 46 account next year. The other big one is the phone system. We have these shiny phones that sit in people's offices, we haven't been able to light up yet. But the city was spending about $8,000 a month on, well, it still is spending about $8,000 a month on phone services. But our new phone services contract, once we get it cut over the new system, will be about $3,500 a month. So I think that works itself out in about 2 years. It pays for the phone system, and also gives teams like Fran's here who have to work with part-timers or people that are remote the ability to conference with each other and be in constant communication, so that they can be a little bit more productive, and we give them an edge to dig out of their respective, buckets or holes that a lot of these departments find themselves in. So with that, I don't think I have anything else. So I'll take questions.
Thank you, Matt. Any questions from my colleagues?
Not so much a question, but a request has been made in the past, hopefully before the new year. When you speak of increased data, the ability for us to be able to get information we need to read in and such, at least making Mr. Hanlon and Ms. Whitehead able to access that information for us. Something we haven't been able to have in the past.
Okay.
And it certainly relates to transparency and greater knowledge on our part, so we can be responsible to budgeting and such.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Not the public. All right, that concludes the meeting for the Human Resource Administration Appointments Committee. Thank you very much.
All right, that concludes the meetings that we had scheduled for tonight. I know there are some people here who wanted to speak on a subject. Normally, we do not take input on committee meeting nights. That's reserved for courtesy of the floor of council meetings. It's 5 after. We'll give you 10 minutes. We'll give it to quarter after if anybody wants to speak. I will tell you right now, though, council's not going to answer. So if anybody wanted to say anything, I'll give you that opportunity right now.
Not exactly sure what the reference was to council not answering. We didn't actually come to ask for questions.
You need to say your name and your address first.
Sorry.
Okay.
My name is Alanis Usmarin. I'm the director of Make the Road Pennsylvania, the largest Latino organization in the state of Pennsylvania. Our offices are located at 115 North 8th Street. We're here tonight because we saw the video from Saturday night where John was surrounded by police officers, beat, had his nose broken, and then was arrested. In the video, it is more than abundantly clear that he was standing there, he was talking, and then police surrounded him, beat him, and arrested him. It is so distressing to be in a time when we know in the Lehigh Valley that we just had Joey Santos, who was murdered, it feels like just yesterday, but 2 months ago. And that officer is currently facing charges and will be going on trial soon. And now we see this, and it's clear to us that the only reason why there is discussion about it is because a homeowner just happened to have a video that was on and filmed the whole thing. And we didn't see one officer, because often people say, oh, well, there's one bad apple. We saw a whole group of officers surround a man who was just standing there on his property, by the way, and beat him, break his nose, and then arrest him. Not sure what the plan is for investigation, but our sources tell us that not one police officer has been suspended or disciplined. And it is clear that this is not an incident of one police officer who has gone wrong. There were high-ranking police officers there They did nothing to step in. It's all on video. We saw what they did. They let police officers literally gang up on a man who was unarmed, who was simply standing on his property, and beat him to the ground, break his nose, and arrest him. The people of Allentown deserve better. We deserve to not be afraid of our own police force. We deserve for it not to be swept under the carpet to see when some investigation will happen. We deserve to have answers for what everyone who sees the video can understand very clearly happened. And the fact that our police force is actually not that large at night, and there were, I didn't count all of them, but to be 10 police officers involved. Not a single police officer stepped in and tried to stop the beating. Not a single police officer, including the high-ranking officers that were there. I'm not sure if charges are still pending against John. John might decide to speak tonight, he might not. You can understand the level of stress that he is under because of what happened to him. But if any charges have been filed, we want to call on the mayor and we ask the city council to speak to the mayor, to direct the police to drop those charges, because there is no mystery. It was on video. The entire city has seen it. We know what happened, and there has to be a stop, and there has to be people who are supposed to represent us who are brave enough to speak up and say, that was wrong. There's clearly a problem because it wasn't one officer in one incident. It was a whole group of officers, including high-ranking officers, and there's a problem if in our police force that is seen as perfectly fine conduct. And that is why we're here.
Thank you. Sir, we still have the 10 minutes, but you need to remove your hat when you're up here.
Good evening.
Sir, your hat.
Sorry about that.
That's all right.
I didn't know this was recorded. My name is Joe Rivera. I'm a member of the Allentown community. I'm the person who posted the video. The person that involved in it is actually a real close friend of mine. The reason he's not speaking today because he's kind of embarrassed, because he feels ashamed of what happened to him. Everybody saw it. Then you got people commenting negative comments without even knowing the real story of the incident. And that shouldn't matter anything, but we shouldn't feel scared to come up to the Lord to ask for help, or even to you guys. Like right now, I ain't never been on nothing like this. This is the first time for everything. I mean, all you guys through this incident, whether it was good or bad. I also have children that be out here. My son is 16 years old, about the same age as the kid that got killed by Donnie Park. So, you know, I'm kind of worried for them, because he be out here as actually an honest student. He played basketball, you know, so he's a good kid. But it's not just about that. It's like I be explaining to him. You don't have to be doing something wrong to get caught up in the system, especially here in Pennsylvania. Like we need better and better judgment in this. Just not just the police officers, because you got 80% of the police officers might be good officers, you know, that actually will help you on any given day. But it's that 2% or 20%, whatever it is, that actually overshadow all the good you guys do too. Because it's not always about bad, you know, but we gotta come up to an agreement to where incidents like this could have been prevented. Like if they would've just told a friend of mine, if they would've just told him, put your hands behind your back, he would've let him arrest him with no problem. There's no need for excessive force. You don't need 6 cops being on one person. Like this is becoming a problem not only in Pennsylvania, but all over the world right now, like all over the United States. And you know, it's always videos like this that overshadow all the good ones. Like, especially if you have an officer too that already been reprimanded by the same incident. And like, why would you, if for one felony we don't qualify for jobs like the ones you guys have, or even if it's for the judge, or work at a courthouse, work for the police department, anything you want to do in life, just for one felony, you can't get a job anymore. So I think that rule should apply to everybody else too. And everybody be held accountable. So if you shouldn't have people, like, if you have already 3 incidents like that, like that's not your job. Like, your guy, you're supposed to protect us, just like we're supposed to protect our community. You know, we shouldn't even have to be speaking on this, and it's not even about racism, because even though it does exist, the officer that did it Spanish too. You know, and it shouldn't be favoring us either, just go with Spanish, or, I mean, he should be doing his job. I'm not asking him to look the other way whenever one of us do it, so I'm just asking to get treated fairly. You know, the same thing applies to everybody. If we can't qualify for certain jobs, then the law should apply to the law too. And that's all really what was my concern over here. I have children that's out here, my daughters, my 2 sons. I'm not the only one, everybody here in the crowd, I got people here that have kids too, that actually out there now, they starting to experience it. So, you know, like, we shouldn't have to tell our kids, be careful, because it's not just about the bad guy, now we gotta worry about, the good guys too. So where are we safe at? That's just all I had to say to this, and it kind of traumatized me too myself, because me witnessing this, I would never think, like, I seen videos like this before, and I used to always look at people like they looking for attention, but what I actually was trying to do was bring awareness to the whole community of what's going on right now. I also met with 5 other people that actually experienced something very similar to it, they just didn't have it on tape. And they're not gonna come forward, because we look bad no matter what, like, that's why I don't blame, like, rape victims and people like that, like, you know, this kind of embarrassing, just having them come out and speak in public, like, on cameras. So I kind of feel their pain now for what they gotta go through, like, that you might not win. And we shouldn't be getting arrested and charged for something we had nothing to do with, like, we shouldn't have to get beat and then charged on top of that. Now you gotta go to court, now you gotta get a lawyer and everything. Like, who can we trust? Like, all we want is trust, and somewhere, somehow, to where we can, I even volunteer for that, like, so we could associate with the police officers, so that way we could build that kind of trust and respect among each other, because just because you're wearing a badge and a gun doesn't mean you can suspect anybody out there. Like, if anything, that's like a Superman cape, like, you're supposed to be our hero. You know, that's all I got to say on it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and by the way, you're welcome to come to the council meetings at any time.
No problem, I'll be doing that, thank you.
All right, thank you all.